Before we dive into the remarkable story of a pilot who left an undeniable mark in aviation history, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss more incredible stories of World War II heroes. On July 13, 1915, in Gwangju, Korea, then part of the Japanese Empire, David Lee Tex Hill was destined to be different. Though his birthplace was distant and unusual for an American boy, he was a Texan at heart, raised in San Antonio. His father, a Presbyterian missionary, eventually brought the family back to the United States. That blend of foreign origin and rugged American roots gave Tex an early resilience that would later define his legacy in the skies. Tex Hill's journey into the world of aviation wasn't immediate. He initially pursued a path through the United States Naval Academy, graduating in 1937. He then earned his wings of gold as a naval aviator and joined the Navy's torpedo squadrons. But it wasn't until a remarkable opportunity arose in 1941 that his name would begin to echo through the warfronts of the Pacific and China. That opportunity came in the form of the American Volunteer Group, the famous AVG, better known as the Flying Tigers. Created under the guidance of Claire Lee Chennault, a retired U.S. Army Air Corps officer advising the Chinese military, the AVG was a group of American pilots recruited to defend China from Japanese aggression. Officially still a neutral country, the United States had to assemble this squadron quietly. Pilots resigned their U.S. military commissions to become civilians, under the employ of a private military contractor working with the Chinese nationalist government. It was dangerous, unprecedented, and entirely unofficial, but men like Tex Hill were eager to join. Tex Hill joined the AVG in 1941, one of the early volunteers who traded a secure Navy position for the chaos and challenge of Chinese skies. Assigned to the 2nd Pursuit Squadron, the Panda Bears, Hill flew the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, a robust fighter not known for its agility but respected for its firepower and toughness. The AVG painted terrifying shark mouths on their aircraft, a design inspired by British RAF units in North Africa, giving the squadron its iconic look that would haunt enemy pilots. His combat career began in December 1941. Mere days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. While the United States reeled from the shock, Tex Hill was already in the fight thousands of miles away. On December 23, 1941, Hill flew one of his first combat missions over Rangoon, Burma. The Japanese were launching bombing raids and fighter sweeps daily, aiming to sever the Allied supply route through Burma and subjugate the region. The AVG, with its ragtag band of volunteer pilots and limited resources, was the last line of defense. In those first critical days, Hill proved himself. With an exceptional blend of courage, skill, and instinct, he didn't just survive, he dominated. On January 3, 1942, Tex Hill scored his first confirmed aerial victory, shooting down a Japanese fighter during a mission to defend the Burma Road. It was the beginning of a pattern that would repeat itself over and over in the coming months. Hill rising into the skies, encountering superior numbers, and coming back victorious. His technique in the P-40 was grounded in precision and aggression. Knowing the aircraft couldn't outturn the nimble Japanese fighters like the Ki-27 or the Mitsubishi A6M0, Hill adopted a hit-and-run tactic. He'd dive from altitude, fire with deadly accuracy, and break away before the enemy could respond. His ability to assess a dogfight in seconds and pick the right moment to strike made him a lethal force. Over the skies of Burma and China, Tex Hill earned a reputation among both allies and enemies. Fellow Flying Tigers admired his cool demeanor in the cockpit and his leadership on the ground. Pilots respected him not just as a warrior, but as a friend, always willing to share tips, gear, and good humor during their scarce downtime. The Japanese, meanwhile, came to know his P-40 like a shadow that couldn't be outrun. One of Hill's most memorable early missions came in January 1942 when the AVG faced a massive bomber formation approaching Rangoon. Dozens of Japanese aircraft were inbound, and the Flying Tigers scrambled to intercept. Hill climbed fast into position, then picked off one bomber after another. He didn't just aim to disable, he aimed to kill. With steely resolve, he attacked the lead bomber formation. Knowing that breaking their cohesion could disrupt the entire raid, Tex Hill ended that engagement with multiple kills, including 2 confirmed bombers and a probable fighter. That kind of effectiveness was crucial. Every Japanese bomber destroyed meant fewer civilians killed in Rangoon and more time for Allied forces to regroup and resist. These weren't just numbers, they were lives saved by Hill and his squadron. The AVG operated under grueling conditions. Sparse logistics, tropical disease, and relentless enemy pressure. Still, Tex Hill never faltered. Over the first months of 1942, he racked up victory after victory. His combat record swelled as missions increased in intensity. Hill led aggressive strikes over enemy airfields, strafing aircraft on the ground, and sowing confusion behind enemy lines. He quickly rose to A status with at least 5 confirmed aerial victories, but perhaps even more impressive than the kills was the consistency. Tex Hill didn't take reckless chances. He understood the mathematics of aerial combat: know your aircraft, know your enemy, and pick the right moment to attack. He wasn't flashy, he was effective. And in a theater where the Japanese often held air superiority in numbers, effectiveness was everything. By mid-1942, the AVG had become a legend. With only 100 pilots and fewer than 100 aircraft, they claimed nearly 300 enemy kills. Their success was astronomical, and Tex Hill stood at the center of that achievement. His leadership and courage had become a symbol not just for the Flying Tigers, but for all Americans watching the war unfold from afar. He showed that even in chaos, valor could make a difference. But as all good things come to an end, so did the AVG. In July 1942, the American Volunteer Group was officially disbanded. Many pilots returned home. Others joined the U.S. Army Air Forces. Tex Hill, however, wasn't done fighting. He transitioned into the U.S. Army Air Forces with a new rank and renewed purpose. Promoted to major and later to colonel, Hill helped form the 23rd Fighter Group, essentially the AVG reborn under official U.S. military command. The fight continued, and Tex Hill remained a leading figure in the war against Japanese expansion in Asia. But by this point, he was no longer just a pilot. He was a symbol of American grit, the face of a squadron that had defied impossible odds and lived to tell the tale, and the tale wasn't over. Far from it. As the American Volunteer Group was disbanded in July 1942, a transition took place. The war had escalated, and the need for seasoned combat pilots in the China-Burma-India theater grew critical. The U.S. Army Air Forces created the 23rd Fighter Group to carry forward the legacy of the Flying Tigers, and naturally, Tex Hill was among the first to be offered a leadership role. He accepted with honor. Now an officer in the U.S. military. Once again, Hill became a squadron leader in the 23rd Fighter Group under the newly established China Air Task Force, still commanded by Claire Chennault. This continuity of leadership and personnel allowed the group to maintain the high standards and combat effectiveness that had made the AVG so feared. By August 1942, Hill was leading combat missions again, this time with more structured logistics and support. The aircraft remained largely the same Curtiss P-40s, though newer models were being phased in. Despite their limitations in high-altitude performance and maneuverability, Tex continued to show how deadly they could be in the hands of a disciplined ace. One of Hill's most striking missions during this period was a daring interception over Hanyang, where a large formation of Japanese bombers attempted to cripple the city's infrastructure. The Japanese had grown bolder, pressing deeper into Chinese territory with escort fighters flying top cover for bombers. Hill led his squadron in a coordinated strike, attacking from above and behind the bombers while simultaneously fending off fighters. He dove from altitude, picking off the tailing bombers first to cause confusion in the rear ranks. While the sky turned into a chaotic dance of bullets and vapor trails, Hill coolly executed defensive maneuvers while keeping his guns trained on target after target. When the engagement ended, his squadron had downed several aircraft. Hill himself credited with multiple kills. Hengyung was spared devastation that day thanks to their ferocity. But Hill's contributions weren't limited to his flight skills. He was a mentor and tactical innovator. He worked closely with new pilots arriving in theater, training them on enemy tactics, especially how to survive and succeed against Japanese Zeros and Ki-43s. These fighters were lighter and more agile than the P-40, but lacked the same durability. Hill's doctrine emphasized the strengths of the P-40, its dive speed, firepower, and ability to absorb punishment. In one training debrief, Hill told a rookie, "If you're turning with a Zero, you're already losing. Use your altitude, use your dive, hit hard, and get out. Make them chase you where your guns can do the talking." That no-nonsense approach saved lives and helped create a new generation of American aces who carried Hill's legacy forward. One of the most dramatic air battles Tex Hill faced came in early 1943 over Yunnan province. Enemy aircraft had begun using new tactics, staggered waves of bombers and fighters, designed to exhaust defenders and pick off the ones left behind. On this particular mission, Hill and his wingmen took off into an already raging aerial melee. Hill immediately spotted a group of twin-engine bombers making a run on a fuel depot. With no time to lose, he climbed above them and executed a classic slashing attack, diving at high speed and emptying his 6.50 caliber machine guns into the lead bomber. The fuselage exploded in mid-air. The others began evasive maneuvers, but Hill was already climbing again. In 2 more passes, he shredded a second bomber, forcing the rest to abort their mission. But it wasn't over. 2 Japanese fighters locked onto his tail. Tex yanked the stick into a high-speed dive, pulling the enemy toward low altitude. Trees whipped past as he flew nap of the earth, then pulled into a sharp climb, rolling over and catching one pursuer in a vertical scissors maneuver. He fired a short burst. The Zero rolled, caught fire, and spiraled into the ground. The second enemy broke off, but Hill wasn't finished. He pursued, chasing the Zero until it ran out of altitude and options. Another kill confirmed. By the end of 1943, Hill had achieved at least 12 confirmed aerial victories, making him one of America's top aces in the China theater. Yet what made Hill's contribution so significant wasn't just the number of kills, it was the leadership. As a major and later as a lieutenant colonel, Hill was responsible for entire squadrons of pilots. His ability to remain calm under fire and to lead from the front inspired fierce loyalty among his men. In late 1943, Hill was given command of the 23rd Fighter Group. Now he was not only a squadron leader, he was responsible for coordinating all fighter operations in one of the most contested airspaces in the war. It was a role that demanded everything: experience, intelligence, charisma, and resolve. Tex Hill had them all. Under his leadership, the 23rd Fighter Group shifted to a more offensive posture. They didn't just defend, they attacked Japanese supply lines, strafed enemy convoys, and launched preemptive strikes on airbases. Hill's operational philosophy was aggressive: make the enemy react. Never let them dictate the terms of engagement. A notable operation during this period was a deep penetration strike on an airfield in Hunan province. Reconnaissance had identified a buildup of Japanese bombers at the site, likely preparing for a massive raid on Chinese targets. Hill orchestrated a multi-squadron mission, coordinating timing down to the minute. He led the attack himself, flying low over jungle terrain, then popping up just before the airfield. Surprise was total. Hill's flight strafed the runway and destroyed several bombers before they could take off. Other pilots hit fuel depots and parked aircraft. It was a surgical strike and a humiliating blow to the enemy. Tex Hill's ability to combine strategy with raw combat skill made him a rare leader. He wasn't just effective in the air. He had a vision for how air power could change the course of the war in China. And that vision came to life again and again through precision raids, coordinated defenses, and relentless training. Even as new aircraft like the P-51 Mustang began replacing the aging P-40s, Hill adapted quickly. Though he always held a deep respect for the Warhawk, he welcomed the Mustang's superior range and speed. It allowed him to plan missions deeper into enemy territory and support long-range bombers more effectively. By early 1944, Tex Hill's name was known across the U.S. military. He had become a symbol not only of American excellence in combat, but of moral leadership and courage under pressure. War correspondents wrote articles about him. Military brass sought his advice, and young pilots dreamed of flying alongside him. But through it all, Hill remained grounded, figuratively speaking. He often refused special treatment, flying standard missions with his men and eating the same rations. He carried a worn Bible in his flight jacket and often quoted scripture to those who were nervous before battle. To Hill, the fight wasn't just about tactics. It was about conviction, duty, and faith. In a letter to his family, Hill once wrote, "I do this because it matters. These people here are fighting for their lives, and I have the means to help. God gave me the skill to fly. I won't waste that gift hiding in safety." It was a powerful message from a man whose actions always spoke louder than words. By the end of his second year in combat, Hill had flown hundreds of missions, destroyed enemy aircraft in double digits, and protected countless Chinese towns and Allied positions. Yet despite the honors, medals, and promotions, what he valued most was the bond he had with his fellow pilots. Tex Hill wasn't just a hero, he was a leader of men. And the war had not yet seen the last of him. By the spring of 1944, Tex Hill had become far more than a pilot. He was now a senior combat commander, respected not just for his skills in the cockpit, but for his fearless leadership and deep understanding of air warfare. Still commanding the 23rd Fighter Group, Hill was shaping the air strategy across much of the China-Burma-India theater, one of the most complex and overlooked regions of world war. Operations became increasingly aggressive under Hill's direction. He authorized a series of offensive sweeps deep into Japanese-controlled territory, targeting enemy fuel depots, troop convoys, and airfields in support of Chinese ground forces. These missions required both courage and calculation. Fuel shortages, long distances, and mechanical failures were constant risks. But Tex Hill's reputation had become a source of confidence for every pilot flying under his command. If Hill said it could be done, his men believed him. One of the most iconic missions he oversaw during this period took place in support of General Joseph Stilwell's forces pushing through northern Burma. Japanese resistance was fierce, and Allied ground troops needed immediate aerial support to break the enemy's grip on a strategic mountain pass. With fog rolling in and low visibility threatening the mission, Hill personally led a flight of P-40s through dangerous mountain valleys to strike at key enemy positions. Flying at treetop level to avoid radar and spotters, Hill and his squadron dropped down on Japanese positions with the element of surprise. Explosions lit up the jungle, supply trucks were destroyed, and enemy fortifications were flattened. The ground troops later credited Hill's intervention as a turning point in the battle, allowing them to advance and secure the pass. Once again, his tactical brilliance and willingness to lead from the front made the difference. As the war pressed on, Hill finally transitioned out of frontline flying, though not by his own choice. Higher command had decided his experience was too valuable to risk. In 1944, he was sent back to the United States to help train new fighter pilots. Though Hill wasn't thrilled about leaving combat, he threw himself into the role with the same energy and discipline he'd shown in the skies over Burma and China. At Stateside training bases, Tex Hill was treated as a living legend. Young recruits listened with awe as he recounted aerial battles, explained combat techniques, and broke down the strengths and weaknesses of Japanese aircraft. He emphasized preparation, nerves, and decision-making under pressure. Hill's presence was so impactful that pilots began writing home saying they'd been trained by the real Flying Tiger. But his influence didn't stop in the classroom. Hill often flew with the trainees himself, demonstrating techniques in real time. He insisted on flying the same planes, eating the same meals, and enduring the same long days as the younger men. In doing so, he earned not only admiration but trust. Even away from the front, Hill stayed connected to his old squadron. He wrote letters to the 23rd Fighter Group, offering advice, encouragement, and guidance. He closely followed their missions and victories. He also advocated for better equipment, more support, and fair recognition for the pilots still in harm's way. For Hill, leadership never ended. It simply took on a new form. In 1945, as the war neared its end, Hill was promoted to full colonel. He had flown over 160 combat missions and recorded 12.25 confirmed aerial victories, though the true number may never be known, as many kills went unconfirmed due to the chaotic nature of jungle warfare. Regardless, his status as a triple ace and one of the top U.S. aces in the China theater was secure. After the Japanese surrender in August 1945, Tex Hill's military service shifted once again. The world was changing rapidly, and Hill had the option to settle into civilian life. But he remained involved in aviation and continued to serve with distinction in the newly created United States Air Force Reserve. His love of flight never faded. In the years that followed, Hill was frequently invited to speak at events, ceremonies, and aviation gatherings. He was often described as humble, generous with his time, and deeply loyal to the memory of those who hadn't made it home. When asked about his own accomplishments, Hill always redirected the praise toward the men he flew with, saying they were the true heroes. Though he never sought the spotlight, honors continued to come his way. Tex Hill received the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Legion of Merit, and multiple air medals. In China, his name was honored as a symbol of American solidarity and sacrifice during the country's darkest hours. Even decades after the war, older Chinese citizens would recognize his name and speak of the Flying Tigers with reverence. But Tex Hill wasn't content to rest on medals and memories. In the 1950s, he helped found the Texas Air National Guard and later served as its commander. He brought with him the same values he had lived by in the AVG and the 23rd Fighter Group: discipline, courage, innovation, and brotherhood. He remained a fierce advocate for pilot training standards and veteran support. Throughout his life, Hill was also a devoted family man and man of faith. He credited his strength in battle to his belief in God and the support of his family back home. His moral compass never wavered, and those who met him were struck by his authenticity and quiet strength. In a world that often turned heroes into legends, Tex Hill managed to stay grounded, honoring both the extraordinary and the ordinary parts of his story. Perhaps one of the most moving moments in Hill's post-war life came in the 1990s when he was invited back to China to commemorate the Flying Tigers. Elderly villagers who had survived Japanese bombings as children stood in line just to shake his hand. Some brought black and white photos of P-40s flying overhead. Others carried faded letters from American pilots thanking them for their support and hospitality during the war. Tex Hill wept openly, not for his own memory, but for the friends he had lost and the people he had protected. He would go on to write a memoir and contribute to documentaries about the AVG, always insisting on accuracy and dignity in how the story was told. He was protective of the truth, and especially of the honor of the men who had flown and died alongside him. In 2007, David Lee Tex Hill passed away peacefully at the age of 92. The aviation world mourned deeply, but also celebrated a life lived with integrity, courage, and unmatched dedication to duty. His funeral was attended by military officials, family, friends, and fellow pilots. A formation of vintage aircraft flew overhead in tribute, their engines roaring a final salute to one of the greatest pilots of the Second World War. His legacy lives on in the books written about him, in the pilots he trained, and in the countless lives he touched both in battle and beyond. Tex Hill was not just a fighter ace. He was a symbol of everything the Flying Tigers represented: volunteerism, bravery, and the belief that sometimes the right thing must be done, no matter the odds, no matter the cost. As the years rolled on, Tex Hill quietly grew into a living legend, a man whose story had started in the cockpit of a P-40 Warhawk, but whose legacy would extend far beyond the boundaries of any airfield. Long after the guns had fallen silent in Asia, his name remained deeply respected in both American and Chinese military circles. He had become the embodiment of a certain kind of hero, courageous, modest, and unwavering in his belief that freedom was always worth fighting for. In the decades following World War II, Hill never stepped far from his roots in aviation. While many veterans chose to disappear into the background of civilian life, Hill used his experience to guide and influence the next generations of airmen. He remained active in the U.S. Air Force Reserve and helped shape the Texas Air National Guard into a respected and combat-ready force. As commander of the 136th Fighter Group, Hill applied the same principles of training, discipline, and esprit de corps that had once made the Flying Tigers so formidable. Even outside of command roles, he frequently returned to the skies, flying aircraft at air shows, exhibitions, and commemorations. Though his hair had grayed and his hands had weathered with time, his eyes still lit up when he stepped into a cockpit. Aviation had become more than his career. It was the language through which he expressed who he truly was. Hill also became a frequent guest speaker, giving talks across the United States at military academies, aviation conferences, and schools. He didn't dwell on the glamour of combat or inflate his victories. Instead, he spoke honestly about fear, teamwork, leadership, and loss. When students asked him what it was like to be a famous ace, he'd often reply, "I was just one man doing my job and lucky enough to come home when many didn't." His humility was not an act. Throughout his life, Tex Hill resisted the spotlight. He didn't chase after celebrity or demand recognition. He preferred to talk about others, about the Chinese villagers who gave up food and shelter to support the Flying Tigers, about the pilots who died before their prime, and about the everyday courage of those who served quietly, without medals or fame. In 1999, Hill published his memoir, co-authored with a historian who had spent years collecting interviews and accounts from Hill and his comrades. Titled Tex Hill, Flying Tiger, the book became a valuable historical document and an intimate portrait of what it meant to fight in the skies of Burma and China. Hill wrote with clarity and emotion, never shying away from the horror or exhaustion of war, but always returning to the belief that he had done what was right. The memoir painted a vivid picture of the many sides of Tex Hill: the determined fighter pilot, the gentle mentor, the man of deep faith, and the fierce patriot. It described the sleepless nights after missions, the haunting faces of civilians caught in the crossfire, and the unspoken bond between pilots who risked their lives day after day with no promise of return. His impact wasn't just felt in words. In the early 2000s, Hill became instrumental in preserving the legacy of the AVG. He supported museums, restoration projects, and documentaries that aimed to educate younger generations about the Flying Tigers. One of his proudest moments came when a restored P-40 Warhawk, painted in the colors of his original aircraft, was unveiled at an air museum in Texas. Standing beside the plane, Hill reached out and ran his hand along the fuselage, as if touching the past one last time. He was also instrumental in bridging American and Chinese memories of the war. At multiple commemorative events, both in Texas and overseas, Hill spoke of his love for the Chinese people who had supported the AVG. He called them our silent allies, and never forgot how many had risked everything to keep his fellow pilots alive. On a return trip to Kunming, where the AVG had once been stationed, Hill was greeted by veterans of the Chinese Army and by villagers who remembered the air raids, the noise of the P-40s, and the shark-toothed planes that had defended them. The reunion was emotional. Hill, then in his late 80s, spoke in front of a crowd of Chinese citizens who held up photographs of aircraft and soldiers from 6 decades earlier. He told them, "You saved us as much as we saved you. We were strangers from another land, but you made us your brothers." In 2002, the U.S. Congress honored the American Volunteer Group with the Distinguished Unit Citation, finally giving official recognition to the contributions of the Flying Tigers. Hill accepted the award on behalf of his fallen comrades, delivering a short but powerful speech. He said simply, "This is for the ones who didn't come home. We flew together. We stood together. And we remember." Until the end of his life, Hill remained active in veteran affairs and aviation causes. Despite declining health in the mid-2000s, he continued to attend events, give interviews, and advise young aviators. His insights were sought by everyone from Air Force generals to historians, and he gave them freely, always steering the conversation back to what really mattered: character, duty, and love of country. On October 11, 2007, David Lee Tex Hill passed away peacefully at his home in Terrell Hills, Texas. He was 92 years old. The news of his death rippled across the aviation world. Newspapers ran tributes. Military bases held moments of silence. Former students, fellow pilots, and admirers from around the globe sent letters of condolence to his family. His funeral was a fitting tribute. A formation of P-40 Warhawks flew overhead, their shark mouths flashing in the Texas sun. Friends and family stood in silence as the sound of the aircraft engines faded into the distance. One pilot, breaking formation, pulled into a steep climb, the Missing Man Formation, honoring a fallen warrior of the skies. Tex Hill was laid to rest with full military honors, and in the years since, memorials have continued to be erected in his name. His image can be found in museums, in books, in paintings, and in classrooms. His story is taught not as a relic of the past, but as a lesson for the present. Today, when pilots walk through air museums and see the shark-toothed P-40s or read about the Flying Tigers, they often come across the name Tex Hill. It stands not just for a man, but for a way of life, a code of courage, humility, service, and sacrifice. He didn't seek greatness. He earned it, one mission at a time, one lesson at a time, one act of integrity after another. And though the world has changed since those days over Burma and China, some things remain the same. The sky is still there. The roar of aircraft still echoes across distant runways. And somewhere, a young pilot looks to the horizon and remembers what Tex Hill stood for. He will always be a flying tiger.